Alright, so this video is not intended to teach an entire chapter. It's just to review some of the high points. I'm not even going to do any proofs. It's just going to be sort of the overview of what my brain thinks about when I hear the word congruent triangles. And so maybe it's good for some of you to review before a test or if a test did not go so well. So the idea behind congruent triangles, the idea is congruent, of course, means the same. So you've got to really keep in mind that they have the same angles and side lengths. Okay, and try not to get angles confused with sides because I really want you to keep it straight between, when you're looking on the inside angles, you're wanting those, of course, to add up to 180 degrees, but the side lengths have nothing to do with 180 degrees, guys. There are rules with the sides. If you'll remember about triangles, a couple of rules with sides is that any two sides, if they're added together, okay, so the if you add, I'll put that, if you add any two sides together, they must be greater than the third side. So that was kind of a big deal. And then, of course, you could classify a triangle, but that could be another video. But you could classify it as scalene or isosceles or acute, so it's good to know what those mean. So for congruent triangles, there were some postulates, and those would be the side, side, side postulate, the angle, side, angle, let's see, angle, angle, side, side, angle, side, oops, and HL. The two that we don't use are angle, 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 that's a no-no, and the other one was the bad word, or the bad word spelled backwards. But those are the two that are not good. But if you see the combinations of these and you can prove that they have congruent, like 3 congruent sides or 2 angles and a side, then you're good to go. So as an example, let me show you a random picture. And what we're going to do is look at a picture, look at how it's marked, and then decide if we get to call them congruent or not. So let me start with this. So let's pretend that this is given to you, A, B, I'll label it all up real good. Okay, A, B, C, D. So if you're given this picture and somebody says, hey, are the two triangles congruent? You say yes or no, and then you say which postulate from above that you had to use. So let's take a look at our picture. Sometimes things are marked for you, like I see that this side's marked congruent to this one, and this side's marked congruent to this one, but nothing else is marked. So you always want to look for, can I mark something myself? So in this picture, we can mark something ourselves. We can mark these two angles congruent, and the reason for that is, you may remember, vertical angles are congruent. So what I've just marked is an angle. Now we look and see what info do we have. Well, I have a side here, I have an angle in the middle, and I have a side here. And over here I have the exact same information. And so if I read my picture around, don't cut across your picture, but if I read it around and in order, I have a side, then an angle, then a side. So what I'm going to do is say, yes, they're congruent, yeah, and I'm using the SAS postulate. And if somebody wanted me to say, well, what's congruent, then I can just make a congruency statement here. And what that means is just name the triangles that are congruent. So triangle, let's go ACB, A to C to B, is congruent to, now this is where you got to be careful. If I went from A to C to B, then over here you better go in the correct order, meaning match up the parts. So here AC is the one that has 2 tick marks on it, so I better start here and go from E to C, since it matches, over to D. And so that's something you always want to be careful of and check at the end to make sure that you have everybody in the right order and that corresponding parts match. And that brings me to my next point of, with congruent triangles, corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. So remember that whole CPCTC thing. It just means that now that you know the triangles are congruent, you can make other statements. Like you can say, oh, angle D must be congruent to angle, what would D go with? D would go with angle B. And the way I know that is what I just looked at. I actually didn't look at my picture. I looked over here and I said, hey, D is the last letter listed here, and so it has to match the last letter listed here. So D and B go together. So anyways, that was just another side note. So let's do one more example. just to get you going. I'm going to do a parallel one because those are always, it may not look parallel, but I'm trying to make it that way. What's happening? Okay, so let me mark these as parallel. Remember, that's what those little arrows are. Parallel, parallel. And then maybe I'll mark this, and let's try to decide if we know that these are similar or not. And let me see if I need to. Let's see. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I want to also mark one more piece of information. Let me go ahead and do this. Okay, so let's pretend that everything you see here was given. Once again, I'll stick with the standard boring A, B, C, D, okay? So if you see A, B, C, D, you want to look at what can you mark on the picture to see if these things are congruent. So these have already been marked for us. Now I get to put my own tick marks on that middle line because it is a shared line. That's called the reflexive property, BT dubs. And the other thing I get to mark, guys, is parallel lines. Now that doesn't mean that you get to put tick marks here. No congruency marks. But parallel lines usually mean you get to mark angles congruent. Now, which angles do you get to mark? Well, what I do is I look for the transversal. So this right here, I don't know if you can see me tracing over it, but I have this letter Z that I'm tracing over and over and over. And the reason I do that is because if I see the letter Z hidden inside the picture, then that transversal tells me that I have alternate interior angles that are congruent. So I get to mark this congruent to this, and that's just an old postulate from, you know, parallel lines and transversals back in the day. So anyways, so now I look at my picture and I decide, okay, now do I have enough information to mark them as congruent? Well, I have 3 pieces of information. Let's look at the order that they go in, okay? So if I'm here and I start here, I've got an angle that's been marked. I've got this side that's been marked, and I've got this side that's been marked. So what do we think? I have an angle, then a side, then another side. Well, I feel like I'm spelling out a bad word, and we proved in class, or most teachers kind of show you why it doesn't work out in class. This is actually not enough info to prove that they are congruent because the SSA is on our no-no list. Okay, so there's an example of a good one and a bad one. So even with all that work and talking ourselves through it, we still didn't have enough information to say that they were congruent, whereas this one up here, we absolutely did. So that's just a little bit about congruent triangles, hopefully to jog your memory, and you know, maybe use as a review, or before final exams, you can watch this again. Thanks so much. Bye.